In the history of the Pokemon TCG, there have been many mechanics that allow you to only play a single copy of a certain card in your deck. In recent years, cards like the Radiant Pokemon have been limited to only one Radiant card in your entire deck. Before that, SPEC Item cards had the same restriction. But before all of those, in 2005, the Gold Star Pokemon were released. Just like the Radiant Pokemon, you can only have a single Gold Star Pokemon in your deck. While Radiant Pokemon are a key part of the current standard format, very few of the Gold Star Pokemon released over the 9 sets they were present in saw any level of competitive success. Today, we're going to look at each cycle of Gold Star Pokemon, examine why so many of them failed to see competitive success, and see what made the Gold Star Pokemon stand out above them. Most failed mechanics in the Pokemon TCG are usually more mechanically complex. But the singleton mechanic behind the Gold Star Pokemon, as seen with the Radiant Pokemon, isn't itself detrimental. As long as the cards are worth using only one copy in your deck, people will play them. Instead, it was the individual cards' power levels and how well they fit into the existing meta decks that determined how much play they saw. Since the Gold Star rules themselves aren't complicated, we can instead talk about how the cycles of Gold Star Pokemon were designed. With each set released from the Team Rocket Returns through Power Keepers era during the 2005 to 2006 standard format, each set had 2 to 3 Gold Star Pokemon. As an example, Team Rocket Returns featured Mudkip, Trico, and Torchic Gold Star. Each of these 3 Pokemon had 70 HP, an attack usable for a single energy, and the Spring Back attack for 2 energy of their respective types. Spring Back dealt 20 damage plus 50 more if your opponent had exactly 1 prize card remaining, as well as applying a different status condition for each card. Mudkip's Spring Back put the active Pokemon to sleep, Trico's poisoned, and Torchic's confused. At the time of their release, 70 damage was enough to knock out many meta-relevant Stage 1 and basic Pokemon such as Delcatty and Gorbis. Even though 70 damage and 80 damage in Trico's case due to poison was incredible into Stage 1 and basic Pokemon, the metagame at the time revolved around hard-hitting Stage 2 Pokemon. Cards like Nidoqueen and Dark Tyranitar, barring weaknesses, could survive the Spring Back attack with ease before using Power Lariat or Bite Off respectively. While the format revolved around 2-hit KOs, something Spring Back was perfectly capable of, not taking a KO with the attack would usually spell the end of the game. Because you only got to deal 70 damage if your opponent had a single prize card remaining, the Pokemon you attacked into with Spring Back likely has the resources needed to deal massive damage to your Gold Star and close out the game. The Spring Back cycle of Gold Star Pokemon also had issues regarding how telegraphed they were. Due to the speed of the format, very few decks could set up the attackers the turn you put them onto the bench. As such, you had to play the Gold Stars from your hand and use your energy attachments for a turn before your opponent had to take their second to last prize card. If your opponent was worried about taking 70 damage, they could simply use attacks that spread damage to set up 2 prize cards in a single turn, or set up backup attackers after Spring Back knocking out their Pokemon. The issue of your opponent taking 2 prize cards in a single turn to win the game was elevated by the presence of Pokemon EX in the format. Since they each gave up 2 prize cards when KO'd, your opponent could attack around Spring Back completely by having a Pokemon EX be their last KO. Another problem behind the viability of the Spring Back Gold Star Pokemon was that when both players were low on prize cards, they were usually not better than other Pokemon you'd reasonably have set up already. Let's say you wanted to use Torchic Gold Star. The best shelf for a card like this would be a deck with Blaziken and its Fire Starter Pokepower to attach discarded fire energies to your bench Pokemon. Blaziken can easily set up Torchic the turn you play it, but the deck was capable of enabling far more powerful cards. Rayquaza EX was a Pokemon that lets you deal massive damage a turn you played it from your hand. With its Dragon Boost Pokepower, you could move any number of basic energies to itself when played from the hand. Afterwards, thanks to Blaziken's attaching energy from the discard pile, Spiral Blast could deal significantly greater damage than Spring Back. The attack also isn't reliant on your opponent having a single prize card left, and is usable at any point in the game. As a comeback mechanic, Spring Back just wasn't strong enough to justify it over Pokemon that contributed towards your normal game plan. Luckily for the viability of Gold Star Pokemon, the second cycle released in the Deoxys expansion were all competitively viable. This cycle, consisting of Latios, and Rayquaza, were all able to see success in the 2006 standard format. The thing tying together all these cards' designs are their second attacks, which have insanely strong attacks at the cost of discarding all energy attached to them. Since they're quite different, we're going to talk about each of them individually. Latias Gold Star could use Healing Light for 1 colorless to deal 10 damage and restore 1 damage counter from each of your Pokemon. The real reason to consider using this card though was its second attack. For 1 fire, water, and psychic energy, Shooting Star dealt 50 damage. If your opponent's active Pokemon was a Pokemon EX when you use this attack, you can discard all energies attached to Latias in order to deal 100 extra damage. During the 2005 and 2006 standard formats, there wasn't a single Pokemon EX that could survive Shooting Star. Despite the attack's incredible strength for the 2005 format, there existed no deck capable of utilizing it due to Shooting Star's prohibitive energy cost. However, this would all change with the release of Hoenlin's Electrode, Magneton, and Castform. These Pokemon could be attached from your hand to a Pokemon with any attached energy as an energy card that provided 2 of any type of energy while attached. But you had to return a previously attached energy to your hand. These cards became key pieces of the standard format, and the ubiquity made enabling Shooting Star significantly easier. One of the most popular decks at the time, Blastoise EX, ran Holin's Pokemon alongside a bevy of toolbox attackers to create a highly versatile engine. Since Latios' attack already required a water energy, Blastoise EX players could use its Energy Rain Pokepower to attach a water energy to Latios before returning to the hand with Holin's Pokemon, just to reattach the same energy. This would leave Latios with all the necessary requirements to Shooting Star and KO problematic Pokemon EX. The deck used this same loop with water energies in Holin's Pokemon to fulfill the energy requirements for Lugia EX as well, who could KO any Pokemon in the game with Elemental Blast. Latios was a key component of the Blastoise toolbox decks and had a legitimate niche in the metagame. Latios was very similar to Latias, with a Miracle Light for 1 colorless, dealing 10 damage and restoring 1 damage counter from Latios along with clearing all status conditions. For 1 grass, 1 electric, and 1 psychic energy, Shining Star dealt 50 damage. If the defending Pokemon was a stage 2 Pokemon, you discarded all energies to Latios in order to deal 100 more damage. Much like Shooting Star, Shining Star was impossible for any meta-relevant Stage 2 Pokemon to survive the attack. With many Stage 2 Pokemon being dominant in the metagame, Latios' Shining Star was arguably more powerful than Latios' Shooting Star. Thanks to the differing energy requirements between Shining and Shooting Star, the two Pokemon never competed with each other for space in the same deck. Latios' main home was in Meganium EX decks. With the Nurture and Heal Pokepower, Meganium EX lets you attach 1 grass energy from your hand to one of your Pokemon and restore 1 damage counter from that Pokemon. The deck played very similarly to the previously mentioned Blastoise decks, with the main difference being that you needed multiple Meganium EX in play. Having access to Latios Gold Star was arguably one of the main reasons to consider playing Meganium decks over Blastoise decks. Unfortunately, Meganium never cleared a large role for itself in the metagame due to mostly being outclassed by Blastoise EX, but it and Latios Gold Star niche did exist. While its initial few standard formats would be fairly lackluster, Latios became an extremely widespread card in the 2007 standard format. Not only was the format largely populated by Stage 2 attackers, but it slotted excellently into Metacross decks. With Superconductivity, Metacross allows you to attach a metal or psychic energy from your discard pile to your active Pokemon at the cost of putting a damage counter onto the attached Pokemon. Since a psychic energy was part of Latios' attack costs, if you had 2 Metagross in play, you only needed a Holin's Pokemon in order to capitalize on Shining Star. In decks using Metagross as a metal-type toolbox deck, Latios saw play alongside them as a potent attacker. The last of the Gold Star Pokemon in this cycle is Rayquaza. For 1 fire and 1 electric energy, Spiral Rush lets you flip a coin until you get tails, and did 30 damage for each heads. Spiral Rush wasn't the reason you played Rayquaza. For 2 fire and 2 electric energy, Holy Star dealt 100 damage to each of your opponent's Pokemon EX in play at the cost of discarding all energy attached to itself. Holy Star is one of the most powerful attacks a Pokemon has ever had in the TCG. While talking about how strong this attack is, it's important to note that most meta-relevant basic Pokemon EX like Team Rocket Sneasel EX had 100 HP or less. Many of the competitive Stage 1 Pokemon EX barely survived the attack, with cards like Medicham EX having 110 HP. In these cases where Holy Star didn't get a KO, Desert Ruins could easily spread the remaining damage needed. If you were able to set a Rayquaza in the right matchup, Holy Star could easily take 4 prize cards in a single turn. With Holy Star's game-winning potential, many players looked for ways to set a Rayquaza as reliably as possible. In the 2005 standard format, decks using the combination of Magmar and Electrode EX were a popular means to facilitate Holy Star. Magmar's Dump and Draw put energy cards in the discard pile while drawing cards, and Electrode EX's Extra Energy Bomb Pokepower could KO itself to attach up to 5 energy cards from your discard pile to your Pokemon in any way you liked, letting you power up Holy Star in a single turn. Even though Extra Energy Bomb gave your opponent 2 prize cards since you knocked out your own Pokemon EX, Rayquaza was regularly capable of taking even more prize cards for yourself the same turn. The combination of Rayquaza and Electrode EX remained popular in the 2006 standard format as well, although it saw less success due to the introduction of stronger non-EX Pokemon. The card was also played in the 2007 standard format, although it saw much more competition for the Gold Star spot. This cycle of Gold Stars remained relevant in the standard format until their rotation, and every Gold Star card after them now had to be better than these cards in order to see play. The third cycle of Gold Star Pokemon included Entei, Raikou, and Suicune. Each of them had the Burning Turn, Lightning Turn, and Splashing Turn attacks respectively, which cost 1 of the respective types and 1 colorless energy to deal 20 damage and switch itself with 1 of your bench Pokemon. Their second attacks cost 3 energy of each of their respective types and dealt 70 damage with the downside if you had less prize cards left than your opponent. Entei's Detonation made you discard the top 10 cards of your deck if you had less prize cards left. Raikou's Meta Voltage deals 40 damage to all of your Pokemon if you had less prize cards. Lastly, Suicune's Crosswind made you discard all energies attached to it if you had less prize cards. Each of these cards tried to resolve the issue with the original Springback cards by providing the player with a strong attack that worked when behind your opponent. Sadly, no deck that was played during this time wanted either of the attackers. Simply put, why play cards with potential downsides when you can use comparable cards with no downsides? Out of all these cards, Suicune had the most potential since it could slot easily into Blastoise EX decks before Hoenn cards were released. Another potential home for Suicune was Politoed EX decks, which used punch and run attacks to deal damage before switching into Mystery Fossil. In these decks, Suicune could serve as another Pokemon that switched in and out of the active spot, but this deck never really needed the redundancy. The fourth cycle of Gold Star Pokemon included Groudon, Kyogre, and Metagross. Each of these Pokemon had the critical collection attack that cost 1 energy of their respective types. The attack dealt 10 damage and let you attach an energy of the same type used in the cost of the Pokemon from your discard pile up to the number of prize cards your opponent has taken. Their second attack costs 5 energy total. Groudon's Ground Smash costs 3 fighting and 2 colorless to deal 80 damage at the cost of discarding a fighting energy from itself. Kyogre's Sheer Cold costs 3 water and 2 colorless to deal 60 damage and prevent the defending Pokemon from attacking next turn if you win a coin flip. Metagross's Hyper Beam costs 3 metal and 2 colorless to deal 50 damage, and if you win a coin flip, discard an energy attached to defending Pokemon. While Critical Collection is a strong attack capable of attaching upwards of 5 energy from your discard pile, the payoff for doing so isn't worthwhile. For 5 energy, you wanted a better attack than either of these cards provided. Another issue with Critical Collection is that it requires your opponent to take prize cards. If your opponent is taking enough prize cards for the attack to be meaningful, that means they have a good setup and are continuously attacking. Only dealing 10 damage to set up a not so great attack and not answering their threats isn't a strategy conducive of winning. It also didn't help their viability that these Gold Star Pokemon were introduced in the same set as the previously discussed Hoenn's Electrode and Hoenn's Magneton. With the far better Latias scene play, there was no reason to consider these Gold Star Pokemon. Being outclassed by Latias, Latios, and Rayquaza is a problem most Gold Star Pokemon we talk about are going to have moving forward. The next cycle to be introduced included Regice, Regirock, and Registeel. Each of these Pokemon have an attack that costs 1 energy of their respective type, and a second that costs 2 of their type and 1 colorless. Regice's Ice Barrier dealt 10 damage and prevented all damage that would be dealt to it by Pokemon EX during your opponent's next turn. Its final Blizzard attack deals 30 damage to active Pokemon and 30 to each of their bench Pokemon if your opponent has a single prize card remaining, and Regice was your last Pokemon. Regirock's Dig Drain dealt 10 damage and removed 1 damage counter from itself. Final Blast dealt 30 damage and had its damage increased to 100 if your opponent only had 1 prize card left and Regirock was your last remaining Pokemon. Registeel's Barrier attack dealt 10 damage and reduced all damage took next turn by 10. Final Laser lets you put 3 damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon in any way you like, increasing to 6 damage counter if your opponent had 1 prize card left and Registeel was your last Pokemon. The main stars of the show are clearly supposed to be their last attacks. These cards are debatably the worst of the Gold Star Pokemon we've covered so far. While the final attacks can be extremely strong if properly set up, it's almost impossible to do so in an actual competitive game. Very rarely do you have only a single Pokemon remaining when your opponent is down to 1 prize card. These attacks also cost 3 energy each, meaning you most likely need additional Pokemon to help power them up. They also have the exact same issues talked about with the Springback Pokemon, where your opponent can simply play around going to 1 prize card. These 3 cards were just plain bad. Seemingly not happy with how their cycle of Gold Stars weren't succeeding competitively, the Pokemon Company changed up their designs of the next few Gold Stars. The Gold Star cards that would be released in the next set didn't share a mechanical theme with the others in the same set, although 2 of the 3 Gold Star cards released in this set fit into older cycles. The next 3 Gold Star cards released were Pikachu, Mewtwo, and Gyarados. Pikachu had the Springback attack which cost 2 electric energy to deal 20 damage plus 50 more if your opponent only had a single prize card remaining. For having the exact same issues as the previous Springback cards, this card was never considered for competitive play. Although a deck existed that could theoretically use it in Metagross Dragonite. If a player wanted to use a Gold Star card in their deck, they could slightly tweak Common List to accommodate Latios Gold Star instead. Mewtwo had the Energy Absorption attack for 1 colorless energy that lets you attach 1 energy from your discard pile to itself. For 1 Fire, Electric, and Psychic energy, Psychic Star dealt 50 damage. If the defending Pokemon was an Evolution Pokemon of any stage, you discarded all energies attached to Mewtwo to deal an extra 50 damage, up to 100. While the card shares attributes with the previously mentioned Latias and Latios, this would actually be its downfall. Decks that would best facilitate Mewtwo, like Metagross, already use Latios since it could one-hit KO Stage 2 attackers that would escape the damage range of its other toolbox attackers. Mewtwo could pick up KOs against some Stage 2 Pokemon and most Stage 1 Pokemon, but players just preferred Latios' ability to remove Stage 2 Pokemon EX like Empoleon or Flygon EX. Gyarados was the most mechanically unique of the bunch and had a very strange second attack. For 1 fire, 1 colorless energy, Spiral Growth dealt 20 damage and lets you flip a coin until you got tails. For each heads, you could attach a basic energy from your discard pile to Gyarados. For 4 fire energy, All Out Blast made you discard cards from your deck until you had 1 remaining. The attack dealt 50 damage plus 20 more for each energy you discarded that way. While All Out Blast is extremely funny and can do obscene amounts of damage depending on how you build your deck, it's a meme attack not worth considering in any competitive deck. The next 2 Gold Star cards to be released continue the trend of being mechanically unique from the other Gold Stars in the same set. Alakazam's Psychic Select costs 1 Psychic Energy and lets you put any 1 card from discard pile into your hand. For 3 colorless energy, Skill Copy lets you discard any Pokemon card from your hand and use one of its attacks as the effect of Skill Copy, as long as you could pay the chosen attack's energy cost. While Psychic Select letting you get any card from your discard pile into your hand is decent in decks looking to play a very slow control game plan, the control decks at the time didn't want the effect. Skill Copy's effect to copy the attacks of any Pokemon without having to set them up on the field is one you'd want to build an entire deck around. Unfortunately, that's not really doable when you can only play a single Alakazam. The other Gold Star released alongside Alakazam was Celebi. This Pokemon's time travel Pokepower had the effect of letting you flip a coin whenever it'd be knocked out. If you flipped a heads, Celebi wouldn't be considered KO, and instead you discard all cards attached to it and put the card on the bottom of your deck. For 1 grass energy, Leaf Shade puts damage counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon equal to the number of energy attached to Celebi. While time travel potentially denying your opponent prize cards could be a nuisance over the course of the game, Leaf Shade's lackluster damage meant it wouldn't be considered over other Pokemon. Meganium EX decks would be the best at charging up the Leaf Shade to high damage thanks to Nurture and Heal, but they already played Latios. Even if other Gold Star Pokemon weren't a factor, Leaf Shade doesn't deal enough damage to be worth using. The next set of Gold Star Pokemon contained Charizard and Mew. Like the previous 2 sets of Gold Star, these sets had nothing to do with each other. For 1 dark and 1 colorless energy, Charizard's Rotating Claws dealt 20 damage and had the option of discarding an energy attached to itself. If you did, you could attach any energy card from your discard pile to Charizard. For 4 dark and 1 colorless energy, Dark Swirl dealt 150 damage, but made you discard all energy attached to Charizard and the top 3 cards of your deck. Rotating Claws is a weird attack since it doesn't put you up or down on energy. The intended use is probably to let you switch a discarded special energy in 1 random energy card you have on a Charizard. This effect isn't great and would have probably been balanced if it had put you up in energy instead of requiring a discard. Dark Swirl's 150 damage is a great number, as discussed previously with the other Gold Star Pokemon, but it's just too difficult to enable compared to Latios and Latios. Gold Star Mew is one of the few Gold Star Pokemon to have carved a competitive niche. For 1 colorless energy, Mimicry lets you use any of your opponent's Pokemon attacks as long as Mew has the required energy attached. For 1 water energy, Rainbow Wave lets you choose a basic energy card attached to Mew and deals 20 damage to each of your opponent's Pokemon that share a type with a chosen energy. Both of these attacks contribute significantly to the card's meta relevance and gave players many good reasons to consider Mew over other Gold Star Pokemon. In the 2007 standard format, Mimicry was able to use almost any of your opponent's attacks if needed due to the presence of Hole in Cast form. With such a simple way to fulfill any energy requirement, Mimicry could prove itself incredibly useful. The card was also a piece of many toolbox decks used when playing against certain matchups. Fast, aggressive decks using the hard-hitting Infernape were utterly dominated by Mimicry, since Mew could use Flare Blitz with Hole in Cast forms attached for 120 damage to KO Infernape due to its water-type weakness. In the 2008 standard format, Mew's unique combination of attacks became even more valuable. Decks using Magmotor loved using Mimicry as a tool in the mirror match. With cards like Typhlosion or Togekiss, you could easily set up a Mew with multiple fire energies attached, which lets you copy Magmotor's Flame Burst or Fireball Bazooka to hit for weakness. Although this wouldn't have been a one-hit knockout, it was enough to swing the damage trade in your favor. Another top-tier deck that used Mew to win its mirror matches was Impeleon. Since your deck already used water Pokemon and won the game through spreading damage on all of your opponent's Pokemon, Rainbow Wave fit perfectly into its game plan. In a matchup where spread damage is key, having a single Pokemon put 20 damage on all of your opponent's attackers is highly valuable. This strategy was so effective that it even won the 2008 World Championship in the Senior Age division. Mew was one of the most widely playable Gold Star Pokemon, but it wasn't the last one to see competitive play. In the final main set with Gold Stars, the Pokemon Company decided to create a cycle of 3 Pokemon like the earlier designs of the card. This cycle, containing Flareon, Jolteon, and Vaporeon, each had a Pokepower that applied some effect to both active Pokemon. When you played Flareon from your hand, Crimson Ray burned both active Pokemon. It also had the Flamethrower attack for 2 fire and 1 colorless, which dealt 50 damage and made you discard an energy attached to itself. Jolteon had the Yellow Ray Pokepower that put 1 damage counter on each active Pokemon when played from the hand. Its agility attack costs 2 electric and 1 colorless energy to deal 40 damage and prevent all damage done to itself during your opponent's next turn if you want a coin flip. Vaporeon's Blue Ray Pokepower healed for 30 damage for each active Pokemon and cured all of their status conditions when played. For 2 water, 1 colorless, Whirlpool would deal 40 damage and discard an energy attached to defending Pokemon if you want a coin flip. While Flareon and Vaporeon were both middling and not very useful, Jolteon fit into almost every deck due to Yellow Ray providing a guaranteed boost to your damage. 1 extra damage counter can often be the difference between getting a KO or not, something that a well-timed Jolteon can help fix. Even though the effect of Yellow Ray was symmetrical, you got to take advantage of the extra damage counter before your opponent could, so it would always put you ahead. The card also had some nice synergies with specific strategies. In decks using Bayonet EX, you could use Shady Move to put the damage counter from your Bayonet onto your opponent's Pokemon. This combination meant that Yellow Ray functionally dealt 20 damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. In the deck that won the 2007 World Championship, Jolteon was played alongside Eeveelution cards like Jolteon EX and Vaporeon EX that both had Pokepowers when played from the hand. Since the deck used multiple cards that worked when played from the hand, Super Scoop Up could provide either more damage with Yellow Ray or Jolteon EX's Evolutionary Thunder, or utility with Vaporeon EX's Evolutionary Swirl. Jolteon and Yellow Ray were so widely usable that it also showed up in the 2008 World Championship winning deck list as well, simply because it provided 1 extra damage counter. Now, before concluding the video, there are 2 more Gold Star Pokemon printed exclusively in the Pop Series promo packs, those being Espeon and Umbreon. Espeon isn't notable in any way as its Pokepower and attacks aren't worth running. Umbreon's Dark Ray lets you discard a card randomly from your opponent's hand when you play it. The card maybe should have been experimented with more, but these 2 Gold Star cards were infamously difficult or expensive to acquire since you could only pull them from a very limited run promotion set. Overall, the Gold Star mechanic itself isn't bad, but there was a huge power imbalance between all the cards using it. This imbalance meant that the good cards outcompeted the terrible ones in every way. Had the weaker gold card stars been made a bit better, maybe more than 5 of the 27 different cards using this mechanic would have seen play.